They gave us all a label before we were old enough to object. My sister got the beautiful one. My brother got the ambitious one. I got the quiet one, which in our family was just a polished way of saying I wasn't enough of anything worth celebrating. For 31 years, that label followed me through every holiday dinner, every school milestone, every family party where my parents would circle the room talking about my siblings while I refilled my own glass and found a corner to disappear into. I stopped expecting anything different. What I didn't stop doing was building. The event that changed everything wasn't supposed to be mine. It was my sister's engagement brunch, a sprawling afternoon affair at a private venue in downtown Charleston, South Carolina. My mother had been planning it for 6 months. She'd found the location herself, a converted antebellum estate with sweeping verandas and a private garden lined with magnolia trees. 300 guests, custom florals, a catering team flown in from Atlanta. My mother had called me 2 weeks before to tell me the venue name and suggest I dress nicely for once. Not an invitation exactly. More of a reminder that I was tolerated at events like this, provided I stayed quiet and didn't embarrass anyone. I arrived alone. My father was holding court on the veranda with his business associates, his voice the loudest thing on the property the way it always was. My brother stood at his elbow looking the part. 3-piece suit, practiced grin, the air of a man who had never once doubted his own reflection. My sister floated through the crowd in a blush pink dress, her engagement ring catching every available angle of sunlight. I found a spot near the garden wall with a glass of sparkling water in my hand, and I watched. That was when my aunt appeared. My mother's older sister had always been the kind of woman who used other people's embarrassment as social currency. She moved through the garden with purpose, and she wasn't alone. Beside her walked a woman I recognized immediately, someone I had been expecting, actually, though I hadn't told anyone she was coming. Her name was Isadora. She was my company's chief financial officer and the sharpest legal mind I had ever worked with. She was wearing a tailored charcoal suit and carrying a slim leather portfolio, and she looked entirely out of place at a garden brunch, which was exactly why my aunt had noticed her. My aunt made a beeline for me, dragging Isadora along like a prop. "There you are," my aunt announced, loudly enough for the nearby guests to turn. She gestured toward me with a dismissive flick of her wrist. "This is the quiet one. You've heard me talk about my sister's 3 children. Well, this is the one who doesn't really come up in conversation." She laughed, the bright social laugh she saved for moments when she wanted an audience. "She does something with computers, data analysis, or something like that. Nobody's quite sure." She turned to a cluster of cousins and added, with the careful cruelty of someone who'd practiced it for decades, "Every family has one, don't they? The one who just never quite figured out their lane." The cousins smiled into their mimosas. My mother glanced over from across the garden, caught my eye, and looked away. I looked at my aunt, then I looked at Isadora. Isadora did not smile. She looked at my aunt with the exact expression a federal judge uses when someone files a frivolous motion, measured, cold, and deeply unimpressed. She reached into her portfolio, withdrew a single heavy business card, and extended it not to me but directly to my aunt. "I'm not here as a guest," Isadora said. Her voice was quiet, but the quality of it made 2 nearby conversations stop. "I'm here on behalf of my client." My aunt blinked. "Your client?" "Her." Isadora tilted her head toward me without looking away from my aunt's face. "I'm her CFO. I flew in from New York this morning because we had a property matter to finalize." My aunt laughed again, a shorter, uncertain sound. "A property matter? Here?" "Yes." Isadora reached into her portfolio and removed a slim folder. She opened it and placed it on the garden wall beside me without ceremony. The venue your family reserved for this event is operated by a private hospitality group called the Meridian House Collective. As of 8 o'clock this morning, your niece finalized her acquisition of the Meridian House Collective in full. She now owns this property, the garden you're standing in, the veranda where your brother-in-law is currently entertaining guests, the private dining room where the dessert course is being plated. All of it. The silence came quickly. My aunt's mouth opened. Nothing came out. From across the garden, I watched the moment travel, the way information moves through a crowd when it's big enough to disrupt gravity. My father stopped talking mid-sentence. My brother turned his head. My mother set down her champagne glass. My sister stood frozen in the center of the lawn with her hand still raised mid-gesture, her ring catching the light temporarily forgotten. "That's not possible," my aunt said finally. "She works in data. She's the founder and majority owner of a data infrastructure and investment firm with holdings in 7 states, Isadora said. The hospitality acquisition is her 4th property purchase this calendar year. The transaction closed this morning. The paperwork is there if you'd like to review it." I didn't say anything. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. That was the moment I'd been building toward for 11 years. Not the drama of it. Not the satisfaction of my aunt's face draining of color while her gold earrings swayed. Just the simple, clean truth of it, that all those years they'd spent looking past me, I'd been looking at everything. My brother reached me first. He moved across the garden with the long stride of someone who needed to contain information before it spread. He got close enough that only I could hear him. "All right," he said quietly. "Good move. You made your point." He glanced back at our father, who was making his way over. "Now let's talk about how we handle the optics here, because Dad is going to want to." "I don't need help with the optics," I said. He straightened. The practiced grin flickered. "You don't understand what you've stepped into. This venue acquisition. Do you know how many months I've been in conversations with the Meridian House Board? I had an offer nearly structured. A partnership that would have anchored my entire southern portfolio. You bought it out from under a deal I was actively working. I bought it because it was undervalued and the board needed a quick close," I said. "They'd been waiting 8 months for your offer to materialize into actual capital. It didn't. It was a timing issue." "It was a liquidity issue," I said, "and we both know it." He studied me for a long moment. I could see him recalibrating, the way he always did when a conversation stopped going the direction he'd planned. Then he crossed his arms. "You've been watching my business?" he said. "I watch everything," I said. "It's what I do." My father arrived before my brother could respond. He put a hand on my shoulder. The firm, proprietary grip of a man who believed affection and ownership were the same gesture. "Sweetheart," he said, using the word the way someone uses a tool they've just picked up off the floor. "This is all very impressive. Truly. But this is your sister's day, and I think we should focus on how the family moves forward together. You've clearly been successful. Let's not make it a confrontation." He leaned in slightly. "Your brother has a very promising portfolio developing right now. There's room for a partnership here. Keep the money in the family. It's the smart move." I looked at his hand on my shoulder. "He doesn't have a promising portfolio," I said. I kept my voice level the way I always did when I was about to say something that couldn't be unsaid. "He has a liability structure that's been deteriorating for 14 months, and the only reason it hasn't collapsed publicly is because he's been servicing the debt with money you lent him from your retirement accounts." My father's hand left my shoulder. "That's private family business," he said, his voice dropping. "It stopped being private when he used it to pitch outside investors on the strength of his balance sheet," I said. "I have the pitch decks. The projections he's been showing to outside capital don't reflect what's actually on the books. My brother made a sharp sound. You went through my financial records. I didn't need to, I said. When you're in the business of data infrastructure, you see a great deal that flows through institutional networks, including the loan applications your firm has filed in the past 6 months. 3 of them, all denied. The garden around us had gone very still. The cousins, near the magnolia trees, were no longer pretending to talk to each other. My mother had moved closer, her face unreadable, in the way it always got when she was deciding which version of events she was going to believe. My brother's jaw was tight. You have no idea what you're talking about. $82,000 at the counter. $82,000, I said. That's what the first quarter shortfall was. You covered it with the loan from Dad. By the second quarter, it was $240,000, and you covered half of it with a line of credit taken against a property you don't own free and clear. By the third quarter, you stopped covering it. You started restructuring agreements with your contractors to defer payment, which means the people who built your last 3 projects still haven't been paid in full. A sound came from somewhere behind me. Someone setting a glass down too quickly on a wrought iron table. My brother said nothing. He just stood there, very straight, in his perfectly fitted suit, with the expression of a man watching the walls of a room close in. You are not a successful entrepreneur, I said. Not loudly, not with anger, just plainly, the way you state a measurement. You are a deeply over-leveraged investor who has been performing solvency for the benefit of this family's social image. I'm not saying this to humiliate you. I'm saying it because Dad was about to suggest I hand you access to my company's capital to keep the performance going. I won't do that. My father was staring at my brother. My brother was staring at the lawn. My mother stepped between us. She had the gift of composure in crisis, not real composure, the kind that comes from actually processing what's happening, but the ornamental kind, the face you put on so the neighbors don't see the smoke. I think, she said softly, that we should take this conversation somewhere private. I'd rather not, I said. She looked at me with the expression she'd been perfecting since I was 7 years old, the one that communicated disappointment so precisely it could cut glass. You are making a scene at your sister's engagement brunch. My sister's engagement brunch is being held in my building, I said. I think that gives me a certain latitude. This family told me I was the quiet one, I said. For 31 years, I was the one they didn't bring up in conversation, the one who did something with computers, the one who never quite found her lane. I looked at her directly, the way I hadn't allowed myself to for a long time. I found my lane, Mom. I just didn't coffee at the counter. Because every time I tried to tell you something real about my life, you redirected the conversation to my sister's social calendar or my brother's latest pitch. She opened her mouth. I sent you an article, I said. 2 years ago, a trade publication ran a feature on my company when we crossed 50 million in managed assets. I sent you the link. You replied with a photograph of my sister at a charity gala. She closed her mouth. Behind her, my sister was moving toward us through the crowd, and beside her, her fiancé, a man from an old Charleston family with a wide, easy smile and the slightly too careful posture of someone managing a great deal internally. My sister's eyes were bright with the specific brightness of someone who had been crying recently and stopped only just in time. What is happening? She said. Someone told me you own the venue. Did you do this on purpose to steal attention from my brunch? I bought the property because it's a strong commercial asset, I said. I didn't plan the timing around your brunch. Your mother chose this venue 6 months ago. I closed the acquisition this morning. You expect me to believe that's a coincidence? No, I said honestly. I expect you to believe it because it's true, but I'm aware that's not how our family processes information. My sister's fiancé put a hand on her shoulder. Let's all just. I'd actually like to speak to you directly, I said to him, calmly, without moving. He blinked. Sorry? I've been looking forward to it, I said. There's a financial matter I think you should understand before this engagement moves further along, and I think you'd prefer to hear it from me privately rather than from a federal disclosure process. The color left his face in a clean, even sweep. My sister turned to look at him. He took his hand off her shoulder. I kept my voice measured the way Isadora had taught me, not because it was more powerful, though it was, but because it was more honest. Anger distorts. Data doesn't. Your family's trust, I said, the one your grandmother established, the one that's supposed to transfer to you on the occasion of your marriage. I paused. It was restructured 14 months ago, quietly, by your father without your grandmother's knowledge, because the terms of the original trust had become inconvenient for his own liquidity needs. I looked at him. You know about this. You've known since March. I was having coffee at the counter because you needed to know whether the inheritance you'd been describing to my sister actually exists in the form you led her to believe. My sister said very quietly, "What?" He said nothing. The trust you described to her, I said, the one that was supposed to provide the foundation for your life together. It's been pledged as collateral against a private loan your father took to cover losses from a failed development project. It exists on paper. It is not liquid. It cannot be transferred in anything like the form or timeline you implied. My sister turned to face him fully. Tell me that's not true, she said. He said nothing. Tell me, she said again. It's complicated, he said finally. The situation is more complicated than what you told me, she said, than what I told my parents, than what we built our entire wedding budget around. She stepped back from him. He reached for her arm. Don't, she said, and her voice was different now, stripped of the social performance, just raw and flat and real. It was the most honest I had ever heard my sister sound. It was my mother who broke the silence. She turned to me with a look I had never seen from her before. Not the sculpted disappointment, not the ornamental composure, something underneath all of that. Something cornered. How long have you known? She asked. About the trust issue? 3 weeks, I said. My firm audited his family's holdings when we were considering a separate real estate transaction in the area. The audit surfaced the collateral problem. And you waited, she said. You waited until today. I waited until I could speak to the people who needed to know, I said. Which was my sister? Which was you? You could have told us privately. I tried to have private conversations with this family, I said. They don't stay private. They get reframed. They get minimized. They get turned into evidence of my instability or my jealousy or my inability to be a team player. I held her gaze. So yes, I said it here, in front of everyone, because here at least there are witnesses. She looked away. And then, because she was my mother and because this was how it always went, she found one more thing to try. There's something else, she said. Her voice was lower, careful. Something you don't know yet. Something I need to tell you before someone else does. Isadora appeared at my elbow. We know, Isadora said simply. My mother looked at her. The loan application, Isadora said. Filed 6 weeks ago against your daughter's commercial property in Raleigh, the building she purchased in her own name 4 years ago. The application included a co-signer signature she did not provide. My father made a sound. Her credit profile, Isadora continued, her social security number, and a forged signature on a mortgage instrument for $2.8 million. The application was submitted to a private lending firm outside your daughter's home state. The funds were intended to cover the operational shortfall in your son's business. She paused. The application was flagged by a financial monitoring service my client subscribes to. It did not go through, but it was filed. My mother sat down. Not dramatically, not in a faint or a swoon. She just sat heavily in the nearest chair and looked at her hands. My father said we were going to pay it back, every cent. It was a bridge, a temporary measure. It was identity fraud, I said. Filing a loan instrument under another person's credentials without their consent, against a property that is entirely mine, purchased with my own capital, without any contribution from this family. You have so much, he said, and his voice was almost plaintive now, the bluster gone out of it entirely. You've never once stepped up for this family. I've never been asked, I said. I've been talked over. I've been managed. I've been labeled and dismissed and left out of conversations about family finances that directly affected my own assets. You did not come to me and ask for help. You went around me and helped yourselves to my credit rating when you thought I wasn't watching. I took a breath. I was watching. I am always watching. That is literally what I built my company on. The afternoon light was long and gold over the garden. The magnolia trees were still. Somewhere beyond the veranda, the catering team was moving quietly, pretending not to hear anything, the way good staff do. I looked at the people I had grown up with, the beautiful one and the ambitious one, and the parents who had narrated them so tirelessly for so long, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not satisfaction exactly, something quieter. The feeling of a door closing from the inside. The loan application has been reported to the appropriate authorities, Isadora said. Standard procedure when our monitoring systems flag an unauthorized use of a client's identifying information. The process is already in motion. My father looked at me. You reported your own parents. I reported an attempted fraud, I said. The fact that it was my parents who filed it is something they chose. Isadora closed her portfolio. The catering is paid through end of service, I said. The event can continue. I have a call with my board in 40 minutes. I looked at my sister, who had sat down on a garden bench, her fiancé standing several feet away looking at nothing. I'm sorry about the trust. Genuinely. You deserve to know before you planned a life around it. I looked at my mother. I'm going to need the third-floor private room for my call. Isadora will coordinate with the venue manager. I turned and walked back toward the main house. I didn't look back, not because I wasn't sad. I was in the specific dull way you're sad about something that's been true for a long time and has only just been officially confirmed. But because there was nothing left behind me that required my witness, everything that needed to be seen had been seen. Everything that needed to be said had been said. The veranda boards creaked under my heels. The catering staff parted. The air inside the converted estate smelled like old wood and fresh flowers, and it was very quiet, and it was mine. In the months that followed, my family's world shrank the way it always does when the infrastructure holding it up turns out to have been borrowed. My brother negotiated a repayment plan with the contractors he'd deferred and quietly dissolved the partnership entity he'd been operating under for 4 years. He started over smaller. The last time I heard from him, he sent a text that said only, "I know I don't have any standing to ask, but I hope you're okay." I didn't respond for 3 days. Then I wrote back, "I am." That was true. My sister's engagement ended not in a single dramatic scene, but in the slow deflation of one renegotiated conversation after another. The trust issue was, as it turned out, only one of several things she and her fiancé had been navigating around rather than through. The last, I heard, she'd moved to Portland, which she was almost certainly good at, which she always known how to read a room. She had always known how to read money. My parents were charged. The fraud application had already been in motion by the time the brunch ended, and there was nothing to be done about that. My father's attorneys filed a motion suggesting the signature had been submitted in error. The motion was denied. They reached a settlement that involved restitution and several years of monitored probation. My mother stopped attending her garden club. She said the commute was too much, but I think it was the questions she couldn't face. I did not visit them through any of it. That sounds colder than it felt. What it actually was clear. The decision had a kind of crystalline simplicity once I stopped trying to justify it. I was not willing to absorb further damage in order to maintain a relationship that had never actually been maintained by both sides. That's not coldness, that's accounting. The Charleston property became the southern headquarters for a new initiative my company launched, a fellowship program for women in data infrastructure. We recruited from community colleges and trade schools and the kinds of institutions that get overlooked by firms that recruit only from the top dozen universities. The first cohort had 19 women. The second had 34. I met someone through the build-out of the Charleston offices, not accidentally and improbably, but because we were both trying to solve the same structural problem with a load-bearing wall and had strongly incompatible opinions about it. He was the lead contractor on the renovation. He was patient and precise, and he argued with me in good faith, which was rarer than I'd known to look for. We were right about different things, which meant we both had to keep listening. He came to our first fellowship graduation. He sat in the back and didn't try to look like he wasn't moved by it. I noticed. The label they gave me was the quiet one. What they meant was that I didn't perform my interior life for their approval. What I was doing all those years while they weren't watching was building something that didn't need their approval to stand. I think about that sometimes, the particular efficiency of being underestimated. When the room isn't watching you, you get to decide what you build in the dark. You get to build the whole thing before anyone thinks to check. And when you're finally ready, you get to turn on the lights.